You're about to discover how to cruise often without breaking the bank. I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my cruising tips for travelers. I want to share with you 10 tips, 10 ways that you could cruise for $50, sometimes even less, up to about $100 per day, which means it's cheaper and you can go cruising much more often. So that's 10 tips that I'm going to share with you, starting with this one. The simplest and easiest way to find cheap ways of cruising is to follow a number of aggregator sites. These are sites that collect together all the really big cruising deals. There's cruisesheet.com, there's cruisedeals.com, and vacationstogo.com. Those three sites will have the absolute lowest best deal. So you simply go on there, look at the month you want to cruise, and you'll find it shows you the total price of the cruise, and many of them will then show you the price per day. So you can then zone in on those ones that meet that budget. And as you'll see, sometimes you can get cruises for even less than $50 per person per day. The other thing linked to that to make it easy is if there's any cruise lines you like, or even some that you're not sure about, sign up to their email newsletters, because that's where they will also announce if they have any deals or promotions. That's the easiest and simplest way. However, there are other things that you should do to make sure that you are cruising cheapest and are able to cruise more often. It's really important, if you want to cruise cheaply and often, to be incredibly flexible. So this means you need to be open to the cruise line you go on, you need to be open to the itinerary you go on, you need to be open to the different ports you go on, you need to be open to the different times of the year you can go. And if you're very set on going to a particular cruise line, or you want to go to very certain ports, then you're going to struggle to find those really amazing cheap deals. If you basically define a really broad scale of things and then get the mindset of what is the cheapest way that I can go and cruise there. So you focus on broadly where you want to go, and then you start looking for price, and everything else you have as flexible as you possibly can. Flexibility is the key to cruising cheaply and therefore cruising very often. If you want to find ways of cruising cheaply and often, you need to focus on lines that are giving you value fares overall anyway at all times of the year. So the critical ones to look at are, take a look at Royal Caribbean, take a look at Norwegian Cruise Line, Carnival Cruise Line, MSC Cruise Line. Those are the really key ones to really focus on. They often have very big ships, they have a huge wide range of itineraries, but also they have a lot of people they need to get on every single sailing. So if you think some of those ships have 3,000, 4,000 or more passengers, they are constantly trying to make sure that they're priced to get people on board. Also, depending on the region you live in, you could find there are some smaller regional lines. So for example, there's quite a few in Europe. So if you take a look at Costa, you'll often find good deals if you want to sail out of parts of the Mediterranean. You'll also find cruise lines in the UK like Marella and Cruiser Maritime Voyages. So also there may be some more regional ones that you can look at, but you need to focus on those key value lines. So if you're going to subscribe to any newsletters, those are the key ones to sign up for. The fourth thing to think about is cabins. You need to focus on inside cabins and ocean view cabins. Certainly that's where you need to focus when you're looking for prices. Those are always going to be the cheapest on board, and those are also the ones that the cruise lines are most likely to discount, because if they're ever going to do promotions, they're going to try and get people to go up to higher grades because it's easier to sell ocean view and inside cabins. So you need to accept that either you're going to have no windows to the outside, or you're just going to have a porthole or small window. Those are the most likely cabins you're going to have to go for if you want to cruise cheaply and a lot. The other thing that you need to do when you book, though, is go for what's known as a guaranteed cabin. Cruise lines have two fares, one where you can specifically choose the cabin, and the other is guaranteed, where they allocate the cabin based on what they have once those people who bought the cabins they really want. Those are always going to be cheaper than choosing your own cabin. So you need to focus on inside cabins, ocean view cabins, and guaranteed cabins. So you will get that grade as a minimum, but you don't choose a cabin, and there is a discount for doing that. I mentioned earlier that you need to be very flexible about timing, but also if you are looking to try and plan, there's a couple of areas where you're most likely or more likely to find cheaper cruises. And that is the shoulder season. What I mean by that is often at the beginning and end of the season. So ships will move, say, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean around about March, April time. You'll find that is often when it's cheaper because the weather's perhaps less predictable. They then move again back to, say, the Mediterranean around about September, October time. So those sort of shoulder periods when it's not school holidays, not public holiday times, those are always going to be when it's harder for the cruise lines to fill the ships, and they're more likely to be discounting. Also, you may want to choose times when the weather is less predictable. So choosing the Caribbean more in hurricane season, there may be some disruptions to the cruise, but people are less likely to book those things. So you need to think around those times of the year when it's going to be less popular. Don't look for cheap cruises in school holidays or Christmas time, those kinds of things, because you're extremely unlikely to find those. So be thinking out of season, shoulder period times. A really good way of getting inexpensive cruises is to look at repositioning. So I mentioned there that they move ships between the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. So they have transatlantic trips at the beginning and end of the season. Because there's so many sea days, people are less reluctant to book those. However, that is when you're going to find great deals, and you'll find repositioning cruises if you really want inexpensive cruises and you want to go on lots of different cruises at those two big time periods of the year. Repositioning cruising are a great thing to look at. A great way of cruising cheaply is cruising with others. You'll find that many cabins on board will be able to have 3 passengers or 4 passengers, and sometimes even more. So if you want to travel with friends or family, so perhaps you have kids or you just have friends you want to travel with, actually booking into one cabin is a great way of cruising more cheaply. Normally you'll find there's a discount for the 3rd person, and sometimes even the 4th person travels for free. It does of course mean you're going to be in relatively confined spaces, so you need to make sure that you get on with those people. But if you're going somewhere nice and warm like the Caribbean or the Mediterranean in season, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time in your cabin. There's lots of things you can do on the ship, but that could be a great way of cruising cheaply. So instead of getting 2 cabins, cruise with friends or family and share cabins. It's really a great way of reducing price. The other thing you could do if you really want to go to the extra level is organize a group cruise. So if you've got a bunch of friends, family that want to go cruising and want to do it inexpensively, one of the things you can do is most cruise lines will offer a free cabin. Now it depends on the cruise line on the numbers, but for example, if you can sell say 8 cabins, so that's 16 people, they might throw in a free cabin, and as I said, the numbers vary a little bit by cruise line. So cruising with people and then sharing cabins or doing group bookings is a great way of cruising more cheaply, and of course then because it's cheaper you can go more often. What's also very important about finding ways of cruising cheaply and more often is understanding how the cruise industry works and the best time to book. Now there's 2 really key periods where you can get great and inexpensive cabins and deals. The first of those is when cruise lines first announce itineraries. So this could be 18 months to 2 years ahead. So they announce the itineraries, they put them on sale. Now what they want to do is they want to try and sell as much as possible at that particular time, because of course they do take your deposit. But what they do at this time of year, which I like doing, which is one of the things that I do a lot, is they will normally bundle things together. So this is the time when you're going to find lots of things grouped together. So you might find they've thrown in a drinks package, excursions, specialty dining, Wi-Fi, those kinds of things. So actually you're getting lots of other things for your fares. So you're paying what you would normally pay for that cabin, but you're getting lots of stuff bundled in. Now I like doing this because I like to plan way in advance, and I find I have often got kind of almost all-inclusive deals by booking at this time. So that's one great time to look if you like to plan ahead or you're more restricted or can't be as flexible. The second time is once you hit 90 days before a cruise goes. Most cruise lines, you have to pay your final balance if you've got a booking 90 days before. Some of them do make it 60 days. What happens then is they take a look at the inventory they've got, how many empty cabins they are, and they then start to work very hard to fill those cabins. Cruise lines want to sail at 100% occupancy, so they want to make sure that every cabin is full with at least 2 people. So what they do is they, first of all, they will start to encourage people to upgrade. So they'll go to people who perhaps an ocean view, try to get them to go into balcony, people in a balcony up to a suite. The reason for that is it's much easier to sell inside cabins and ocean view cabins than it is to sell higher grade cabins. And also they don't want to be seen to be discounting those higher value cabins. So at the 90-day period, it's a really good time to start looking for deals, because this is when you're going to get much cheaper fares, particularly for inside and ocean view cabins. Now you're not going to likely get all those things bundled in. However, if you've already booked your cabin, as I mentioned much earlier, this could be a chance to get a better cabin without paying any more money or paying very little money. So although you've settled or decided you're going to go on an inside ocean view, you could find yourself in a balcony for almost no extra money. Now what I think is also very important, if you live in a country or a place where a port is very easily accessible, I recommend that you then focus on that 90-day booking period, because you're not going to have to worry about the cost of getting to the port. And so you can really take advantage of low fares. However, if you live a long way from a port, so you're going to have to fly to a port, it's actually better to focus on the longer booking period. Now, why do I say that? Cruise fares will tend to go down the closer you get to a sailing if there's capacity, whereas airline fares tend to go up. So what I like to do, as I mentioned, I book way in advance, and then I book my airfares way in advance because that's the cheapest time. So when airfares come on sale, they're at their cheapest and they will go consistently upwards. So if I find a great deal within 90 days, which I was actually just looking at recently, the airfare was prohibitive. It cancelled out all of the benefits. So basically, if you're close to a port, you can drive to a port or get there really easily without lots of airfare costs. Focus on that 90-day period. If you're going to have to fly to a port, you probably want to book further in advance. Understand how cruise lines work and what works best for you based on your location. What's absolutely critical if you want to cruise cheaper and more often is you're going to have to be absolutely brutally ruthless once you get on board. The cruise lines are giving you these really low deals, $50 or $100 or whatever, to get you on board, because once you're on board, they are hoping and they're going to work really hard to get you to spend a lot of money on board. So you could, of course, cancel a lot of that out. So what you need to do is focus really, really hard on understanding what your maximum amount you're going to spend on board. The things that you need to focus on is gratuities. Gratuities are normally auto added. Now, some people do go and take those off, and of course that is something you could do. The crew do rely on those gratuities for their salary because in reality that's part of their salary. So that's an ethical choice, I guess, that you need to make. So do think about budgeting gratuities. You're going to be brutal on drinks because drinks packages could cost you more than your cruise fare. If on many of those cruise lines you might be cruising for $50, $100 a day, but the actual drinks package could be more. You also need to think about excursions. You pretty much need to exclude excursions and do all self-touring yourself, where you're either going to beaches or you're using hop-on hop-off buses, so really, really low cost. And then avoid specialty dining. So all those things are one cost. You're going to be really, really strict in terms of those. Otherwise, you could find out that you're not saving any money because you're ending up spending a lot of money on board. The advantage, of course, of what I was saying is if you've booked way in advance, like I like to do, a lot of those things are then covered within that lower fare because I've got little packages. Of course, you could also look at all-inclusive cruise lines. However, in my experience, some of the all-inclusive lines, like the new Virgin Voyages, in reality, we're not seeing a lot of discounting for those, and actually the entry-level fares are still pretty high because they do bundle things like your Wi-Fi, some basic drinks, gratuities, or within that. One of the things I mentioned, of course, is proximity to port, because that could affect where you're going to find the best and sharpest deals for you. There is another thing to consider, is if you look at the really big ports, so you look at ports like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, or Barcelona, or Rome in the Mediterranean, is there's lots and lots and lots of ships in there and lots of capacity. So again, there's likely to be much more competition and spare capacity going. So that's where you're going to often find deep deals, particularly closer to cruising time. The other thing to look at though, and this also may depend on where you live, is look at some of the more unusual ports. So you might look at Tampa, for example, or ports which are not very big embarkation ports. The cruise lines will have less capacity there. They might have older ships there, but they generally are lower priced. So I've met lots of people who on different cruises, they will tend to go and cruise because it's easier for them to get to more out of the way ports, because they find that the general level of fares is much lower. Now the ships do tend to be a little bit older, perhaps not glitzy as some of the new ships, but it's definitely a great thing to look at. So look at the really, really big ports and look at those little out of the way ports and see what deals are going on for those two. Another great way, of course, of cruising for less and more often is kind of an obvious one, which is go for shorter cruises. So your absolute outlay is less. So if you want to focus much more on cruising a lot, start to look at shorter cruises, 3 days, 4 days type cruises, sometimes even 5-day cruises, because those tend to be a smaller total amount of budget. So of course you could take your cruising budget for the year, split it up against a number of smaller cruises, and then you're going to cruise more often. I have loads more advice and tips packed into different videos. So why don't you watch another one of my cruising tips videos right now?